What did I do this fortnight instead of writing? Well, I made a ship. The reason being, my daggerheart party were being sent to find a skyship that was taken away in a windstorm that happened in the previous session. Also, I've always wanted to make a ship. Never had the skills. Still don't really. As with all my builds, I start with scraps because that's going to save me from buying anything new, and I have so much sitting around in here. So I got some studs, just used them in the offcut size that I had, then added some on the side because it wasn't quite wide enough. It's going to be a very narrow ship, and that doesn't really add for a lot of versatility when you have it as an encounter in Daggerheart. So I cut those to the right height, matching the two that I stacked on top of each other, drew a basic shape of a ship, then took it over to the bandsaw to cut it into shape. That worked fine for the basic shape of like the prow of the ship and the helm. Did not work for the rear of the ship. The bandsaw I have, the blade isn't thick enough to handle this like amount of timber, and as it kind of hits the grooves and the notches in the wood, just wasn't strong enough to stay straight, just kept bending out. I tried to rectify this with a handsaw. Worked a little bit, but it kind of butchered it. I didn't have any guides. That handsaw has never been sharpened. It's also just like the cheapest thing I grabbed from Bunnings one day, so, you know, not really going to do the job, not exactly a professional grade tool. So even though I managed to get kind of the front and the sides working well, the rear of the ship really began my tumultuous relationship with this build. I wanted to build a rail on it because every ship has a rail for safeties, and to do this I thought, well, I've got a router, perfect. I used the router table, set my heights and my depth, and gave a little bit of space there for the rail itself. So I was just going to carve out the inside of the top of this ship. And that worked great until I realized that my router table doesn't go to the depth that I needed for it. To correct this, I tried using the Dremel, and I tried taking the router out of the table and using it from above. Look, I didn't have the correct frame to do that on the ship, and the Dremel itself just kept struggling with the thickness of the timber, the way I was trying to carve, you know, like up and downs is not really the way a Dremel's meant to be used, at least in my experience. Also, every time you catch on a notch, you're just flying off the rails. So I butchered it. And then I realized in this butchering process that the ship wasn't level and the rail wasn't working. So I tossed it down the backyard. I picked it up, cleaned it up, didn't get any footage of that because it's embarrassing. Then I decided to scrap that idea of the rail and I'd figure out something else. So I cut the whole top of the ship off and left it flat, and decided to make a raised portion for the prow of the ship, mostly to cover up the butchering that I'd done with the router and the Dremel, but also because it adds depth and it looks kind of cool. Also added a helm. I wanted it like a little captain's quarters because the ship needs that kind of thing. Didn't want it to be flat. Routed some stairs onto that. That worked because I know how to do that. Tidied it up with the Dremel. Then after I regained some confidence, I moved on to creating some rudders. I had the offcuts from where I made the raised prow section. They were practically the right shape already, so I just cut them to be the exact same shape and then glued them on along with everything else. This particular skyship, it's steampunk styles, so I had some leftover pieces of dowel, which I cut to size and then just kind of hollowed out the top and were to glue on there to lead to what would be hot air balloons. We're going to use our imaginations for those because I wasn't carving hot air balloons out of wood. For one thing, super difficult. All right, I can't make a ship, let alone a round shape. And then had some smaller pieces of dowel that I ended up rectifying my railing issue. Drilled some holes, popped those in and around the front and around the top of the ship. And then I made a wheel and a little door out of some leftover plywood that I had. After I made the wheel, I then struggled to figure out how I was getting that to stand up on the ship, glued on there. Ended up deciding to glue it to one of the rails, which seems like the obvious choice, but look, I was tired. Okay, it was late at night. And then puttied that bad boy like I was icing a cake. It then came to game day. Now, I was having my daggerheart session that afternoon, so I really had to cram. I had about 6 hours left to polish this whole thing up, to carve it, to paint it, and to get it ready. So I carved the stairs for the prow of the ship. I reshaped the hull a bit so it wasn't so square. This brings me to the home stretch, the carving and the painting. I was very done by this point. I'd been very frustrated. Like, look, I loved the look of it. It was starting to look really cool, but it's just that at that stage where you're so tired from working on this one thing. It was a 3-day effort, and look, I could have started it earlier, but that ain't me, okay? I'm gonna procrastinate and then cram, all right? It worked all through high school. Didn't work so much for university, but it's working again now. I had like a charred brown, which I used for the ship, mixed that with some white to do some dry brushing over the top, and then had like a lighter brown that I just mixed with a bit of yellow, I think, to just like splotch over, to try and give it a bit of, depth and difference instead of just being a flat color. I used a wolf grey for the undercoat of what would be steel portions of this ship, because this thing's meant to be made of like scrap pieces from an old mining town. I have to apologize, didn't get a lot of footage from the painting. That's because it was game day and setting up the cameras and everything. I was just getting a little bit stressy, okay? For the grey, for the steel portions, I didn't want it to be so slick and so nice, so I actually, I had a rust paint that I used, and I just mixed that with a ton of water. The first kind of painting I did, I was kind of brushing it over, and it wasn't really giving me the look, so I mixed it with more water, and then just dabbed that bad boy on there, and just let it drip, which gave me the exact look that I wanted, and it's perfect, because it obviously looks like something wet's gone on there, and has been left to dry on it, and it's rusted. Amazing. For the rails, my son had some twine. It's great. Twine in his craft box. I just loop-de-looped that around there, super glued my fingers together a couple of times, but it worked out for the most part, and I think it looks brilliant. The rudders, the canvas on there, just painted an orange, and then went over it with a bit of a brown, and then just dirtied it up with another wash. Put some stitching on there, was my wife's suggestion. Great idea. She's awesome. She's full of good ideas like that. Just did that in pencil, honestly. I thought about painting it, and then when my wife showed me what she meant in pencil, I was like, well, let's just do that. That works great. So yeah, it was a 3-day effort from start to finish. Because I don't dive into these things with a lot of planning ahead of time, other than an image in my head, probably had some headaches that I didn't need to have, but look, it's how I work, and I can't, if I pre-plan it, I'm not going to follow the plan anyway, so just kind of cut out the middleman on that one. I am super stoked with it. The group was so excited when they saw it. They all gave me praise. It was lovely. I felt real good about myself. We didn't actually have any combat on it, because that's how Daggerheart goes. But they did make it to the ship, which is why I showed it to them. Also, I wanted to show it off because it took so much effort. And it's a bit of a bigger ask than just making some rocks like last time. I think I'm going to go for a bit of a softer approach on this next one. Maybe I'll just make some trees for the next session, because this plate was hard. I should write now. So I'll catch you the next time I procrastinate on that.